Hi, I am here to talk to you guys. I was asked to come here to speak to you guys about the history of Black firearm ownership, as well as the policy and the laws that were racist practiced to gain regulation over firearms over time, and how those racist policies and laws now affect and inform our current gun ownership. And of course, our gun control, which is why my shirt says gun control is racist. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, because I do a little bit of everything. I wear a couple hats. So I own Fortune Firearms. I opened that up in 2020. I'm a federal firearm dealer, so I actually own a gun store. I sell firearms all across the United States. Pretty much anything California compliant, firearms, ammunition, all of the above. I'm also a NRA certified pistol instructor. I've been a pistol instructor for 3 years. I am a NRA range safety officer. I am also a post-certified firearm instructor, so I did go through the Sheriff's Academy and acquire my post certificate. I am a California concealed carry instructor, and also I am on the Riverside County CCW vendor list. I'm also awesome mother and wife. So there goes my husband back there, and there goes one of my 4 kids, rocking the brand. So that's just a little bit about me. So just a little bit about my first experience with firearms. Let me go back one slide. So my first experience with firearm is very important, because I think in the Black community, our first experience with firearms is pretty common. For us in our community, a lot of us were exposed to firearms by somebody who never should have had them. Never should have showed us, never should have gave it to us, never should have let us fire it. It's more than likely not our parent, it's a friend or uncle of a friend or something like that. For me, my first exposure to firearms was I had a girlfriend that lived down the street, and her father had a .22 long rifle in the house. It was always underneath the bed. Her and I had always looked at it. We were in elementary school. And one day we're like, well, let's shoot it. Okay. So believe it or not, we took it into the garage, and I found out on a much later date that the can we were shooting it was one of those Rosalium gas cans, because you look for something red, right? The red target. It was one of those Rosalium gas cans, because her and her father and her parents used to ride dirt bikes. And so we chose one of those, and we shot it. We were shooting at it. And then when that gun emptied, we just put it back. We didn't even know what to do with it at that point. So we slid it back underneath the bed, and the discussion was over with. But that right there is what also formed my opinion of what is needed, and especially within the Black community when it comes to firearm ownership. Because for a lot of us, there's a lot of things that we don't teach as far as firearm ownership and firearm safety and introducing the firearms to our children. But first, we're going to dive into the history of some of our laws that I actually find pretty interesting, as I did a lot of our research. So the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution protects the rights of Americans to keep and bear arms. It was ratified December 15th, 1791, along with other articles of the Bill of Rights. Keep in mind, well-regulated militia. We all remember that, right? I hear it often. Well-regulated militia being necessary to secure a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay? Except for the fact that the restrictions and all those restrictions within this law were placed upon Black people. Okay? The Second Amendment did have prohibitions for African Americans to own firearms. This is the beginning of a large cycle of laws that were written to disenfranchise African Americans from enjoying the exact same liberties as our counterparts did. At the time, African Americans were not considered full citizens. So these rights were, of course, initially granted to citizens. So that was the first thing that they got to use, was that the fact that we were not citizens within the Constitution. So there, we were prohibited from even owning or possessing a firearm, whether we were freed or not, okay? gun control regulations, they use things like excise taxes, gun rosters, license to carry, and literacy tests to keep firearms out of African Americans' hands. Does this sound familiar? All of it? All right. So it was implemented to suppress our rights to bear arms. Initially, they said it was for to make sure to prevent an insurrection, okay? There were severe punishments if anybody of African American descent, and let's just say black or brown, because it wasn't just black, we had Indians as well that could not have firearms at the time. Let's say black and brown. There were severe punishments if they were caught to have firearms. All this did shape the relationship within our communities with firearms. We do have to understand that. Telling us no, and you cannot, and putting in place these severe punishments prevented us from creating the safety nets that we needed within our communities, so we're able to navigate the water safely and securely with our firearm ownership. If you research any type of gun control, you're going to find that a lot of it does have racist history. It wasn't until the 1900s where the laws started hitting the entire country, and we all pretty much started getting engulfed in the excise taxes and the gun rosters and the literacy tests that are now our firearm safety certificate tests that we have to now take a quiz to decide on if we are eligible to protect ourselves in home should a bad guy come kick our door in. Damn, I wish I studied for it, right? Is that what it is? So, and then of course, our license to carry, it's a huge thing, but we're gonna go into that as well. Black Code. So this is where it started. It started with the Second Amendment, but after that, in 1865, there were Black Codes implemented. Some of the things that were part of it was that we had no right to bear arms, okay? Free or not, no right to gather and worship in groups, no right to read or write, no right to vote, no right to free speech, and very strict vagrant laws that anything that we do, any type of minor infraction can land us back in jail and we'll be sentenced to involuntary servitude, okay? So at this point, we were considered freed, but not seriously restricted, freed but restricted. Put that on a shirt. Yeah, sure. Now, it's important to understand about the Black Codes because the Black Codes also start applying into when you start getting into the literacy tests and poll taxes and you wanting to actually start getting into these rights. Keep in mind that we didn't have a right to read nor write. So a couple of prohibitions and confiscations that are on the books, just a few of them. 1834, South Carolina prohibited free blacks from owning or carrying firearms without a special license. Special license is pretty much what we're dealing with right now within our concealed carry community. We have to go to the sheriff's department and ask for permission, right? Back then, for African Americans, we had to go to a judge, and that's where it started. At that time, free white men were allowed to walk around with their firearms all they wanted to. So understand that these laws began with us and slowly but surely started creeping, slowly but surely started creeping into the entire country, okay? In 1831, Virginia passed a law prohibiting free blacks from owning firearms and required that freed blacks surrender their firearms. And in 1825, Florida even took it a step further, and they allowed white individuals to do a firearm confiscation of black homes. They were allowed to go into black homes, search black homes in their entirety, and confiscate any type of firearm or any type of ammunition that was related to a firearm or any type of defense mechanisms. At that time, the government did turn a blind eye, of course. There were very little efforts to intervene in these type of actions. So imagine living in a community where you are 100% threatened by the chaos and the violence of the KKK. I'm sure we've all seen movies. It is just a snippet of what actually went on. You know, that's on the light side, okay? And not only that, when you pick up your phone, you call the police to come out, and now you're dealing with something like police brutality, okay? So not only you needed help, but the help comes and victimizes you further. There was absolutely no type of government support, which is why the Second Amendment was so important to the Black community, because this is one of the only ways that we were going to be able to protect our community as well as patrol it, okay? So as things kept progressing, the laws kept progressing, and they continued to write more and more laws that were intended to restrict and revoke our self-defense rights. So in these communities that we're talking about, it's very similar to what we're seeing right now going on in, let's say, LA County. LA County is crime-ridden, okay, from the top all the way down to the bottom, and probably going up more in Northern California. But those happen to be the same counties that have the strictest gun laws. The strictest. I mean, they even have their own ordinance for storage laws in their county. You have a mandatory notification if you are pulled over by a police officer and you are carrying a concealed carry permit, only in LA County, which is a pretty interesting thing because you no longer have the stop and frisk. But now, if you are in their county and you are a legal, law-abiding, tax-paying concealed carry holder, and you get pulled over for a driving infraction, you could have just ran a stoplight. You are required to notify that LAPD officer or whoever pulled you over in that county that you are carrying a firearm. Okay, there is an entire protocol that I teach within my concealed carry class because of who LA County is, that I make sure that we address how, and it doesn't matter what color or what sex you are at this point, because LA County has gotten away with everything from the 40s to the 60s, and it still goes on now, which is why we do have this rule, and which is why I do teach how to have a safe vehicle stop when you do go to LA County. But, you know, it's no surprise that this is in LA County. 2024, very similar situations as well in New York. Okay, New York has some of the strictest gun laws. Oh my God, and they have so much stuff going on, and they don't want people concealed carrying. And notice that these communities are always the urban, low-income communities where you have so much guns and so many gangs, and the only thing they want to do is not try and write policy that's going to repair the problem. Their agenda is to restrict the tax-paying, law-abiding from being able to protect themselves. Los Angeles, so Los Angeles is also making moves to close their local gun stores. So I don't know if you guys follow any of the gun stores in Los Angeles County and see what's going on. So there was another gun store in LA County called Redstone Firearm. They were in Burbank. And when I say Los Angeles put the squeeze on them, Jesus, they put the squeeze on them. So during COVID, what LA County decided to do was to put a moratorium on all the gun stores so nobody can move in. If you move out, you don't come back, okay? I can't say I want to move from this building to this building. So what that allowed to do was for their landlords to be predatory. So Redstone had, I'm not going to throw numbers, but they had a 500% increase in their rent since COVID. And the reason why they had a 500% increase in their rent since COVID is because they own a multi-million-dollar business that had been established for 10 years. And the only way they can keep it open in Los Angeles County, where they had originally been, was to stay in that place, was because of the moratorium. They couldn't move. On top of that, and the tax that has been assessed to firearms, that additional 11% tax. And then Burbank, the city of Burbank even took it a step further. So what they decided to do was go around to building owners that are housing the firearm stores and write a policy that required for the building owners to sign a letter authorizing gun stores to operate within their buildings. And of course, it did shift a little of the responsibility, the liability over to the landlords. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. If you know any gun store owners in LA County, what you're going to hear is that this is a direct disenfranchisement of their clientele. My store is near Temecula wine country. It did not affect my clientele, but I know who it affected. And I'm seeing all LA County gun stores suffer because you have to consider what it is now that it costs for people to acquire these firearms. And again, these laws did contribute to a much larger strain of firearm ownership and the Black community's relationship with it, because everything is saying no, and if you do, you have severe punishments. So taxation as a form of regulation is nothing new. The United States has been doing it for a very long, long time. It wasn't until, again, the 1900s where we started seeing and we're like, whoa, we don't like that type of stuff. So after the Civil War, South Carolina had a law prohibiting Blacks from holding any occupation besides farmer or a servant unless they paid an annual tax between $10 to $100. Can you imagine that? I have to pay between $10 to $100 to hold an occupation other than a farmer or a servant, okay? That is tax regulation at its best. They also passed a law that punished any employer from paying a Black person a higher wage because the state had a Black labor contract, okay? That's gonna be important for you to remember when we start going into the poll taxes and why we never made it to the polls. At that time, it was pretty much a slippery slope when we started allowing the country and our government to start using taxation as a form of regulation, which is what pretty much brought us where we are right now. You know, we're paying almost 20% for firearms because we never spoke up. During the Jim Crow times, we had different type of taxations that did come in place. One of them is the poll tax. So the poll tax, they had to pay $1 to $2 a year just to be able to vote, okay? $1 to $2 a year. However, $1 to $2 a year during that time was a lot of money when you start considering that an average person, average African-American, made somewhere between $300 and $500 a year versus the white counterparts that were making $1,000 to $1,500, okay? That is one of the main things that kept us away from it. Also, we had a literacy test to be able to vote. That literacy test was directly tied into your right to own a firearm. So if you couldn't pass the literacy test, especially coming out of Black code when it was illegal for you to learn to read and write, you see how they keep moving that line? They say, first you're slaves, you can't have it. Okay, we're gonna give it to you. We need you to pay a tax, so we're gonna pay you less. Okay, well, if you get the money, we need you to read and write. But we also wrote a law that said you cannot read and write, right? You like how they keep moving that line? Just chasing the laws, right? The literacy test, it was also indirectly tied to firearm ownership. So if you couldn't pass the literacy test, you also were not allowed to vote. It was directly aimed at disenfranchising a marginalized community, especially, of course, the Black and brown community. There we go. All right, so the taxes were also a broader attempt to silence the Black community and to silence their voice. At the time, there was only 44% of the Black community that can actually read and write. And even the ones that did make it down to the polls to try and read and write, the violence that was inflicted on them just for trying to was just horrendous. Because you got to keep in mind, they have to go down there and walk through town to go file their paperwork just to be able to vote. But then they also had to return back home where you can have night riders that'll come through your community and you're not allowed to have a firearm to protect yourself. So why go to the polls, right? You use the term night rider? Is it night rider? It is night rider. Yeah, night riders. It's Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, when the sun goes down, they come out. Yeah, sundown towns, all of that. So that was, again, a much broader attempt to silence the Black community. Does anybody in this room agree that we need to pass a literacy test to be able to protect ourselves? I mean, self-preservation is one of our main instincts. That is the first thing, like the guy that was here before, not sure if anybody was in the room, we had a man here that he was in a mass shooting. He was shot in his head, okay? He is missing an eye. Was he shot once? Okay, he was shot once in his eye. He was the second person that was shot. 7 people were shot and he blacked out on the floor, and his self-preservance kicked in when he heard his wife upstairs screaming his name. He got up. Okay, that is our basic instinct. And with all these laws, we're being denied the ability to actually execute that. Okay. So here are also a couple other taxes and regulations that our American government had rolled out since they're so amazing. So we got the National Firearms Act of 1934. That law was to regulate the manufacture and sale position of machine guns, short-barreled rifles, and suppressors. So that tax right now is up to $200. You want a suppressor in any other state that actually allows you to get a suppressor, you will pay them $200 just to get it in that hand. Okay, that's not including the cost of it. That's not including your DROS fee. That's not including anything else, more than likely some sort of transfer fee to get it to the dealer that you want to get it to. So you end up tacking on at least another $150. So $350 on top of any type of suppressor that you want goes to our government. And the odd thing is that this is not about public safety, right? It's not about public safety. If it was about public safety, we wouldn't have them, right? They're not saying it's about public safety, so you don't need them. They're saying it's not. We just want your money. You want it? Pay us. So the taxes. You got the Firearms Act of 1938. This demanded that the dealers become licensed, include record-keeping requirements, and start taxing on interstate firearms. You got the Gun Control Act of 1968. That one created a list of prohibited persons, set legal handgun age to 21, long gun to 18 years old, additional taxes on importation limits on anything that was not going to be used for sport. And the Firearm Owners Protection Act was an attempt to ease some of that and roll it back. But of course, after that, we kicked into high gear and took that entire act and threw it in the trash, in my opinion. So, where did I go? Oh, I did skip one, sorry. So the taxes and licensing, it's always pretty interesting when you get into concealed carry, right? Taxes and licensing, that's what we call it. Taxes and licensing. It sounds official, like it is something that is necessary. It sounds like something that is so important, although it isn't. So in LA County and in some cities in California, this is the cost of what it takes to acquire a firearm, a $500 firearm. Okay, keep in mind, I said the firearm is $550. And to get your concealed carry permit. This is taxes and licensing. $395 for application fee, $150 psychological evaluation, $85 live scan, $350 16-hour course, $550 for the firearm, $37.19 for your DROS, $25 for a firearm safety certificate, $56.38 is your sales tax. $60.50 is Gabby's sin tax. For a whopping $1,700, you can buy a average firearm. Okay, I'm not even talking about a badass gun. I'm not even talking about a staccato. We're not talking about a SIG. We're not talking about a Cantig. We're not talking about anything high-end. I'm talking about a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, an 8-round magazine with a chamber indicator and a safety. Okay, you got the frame in your hand. Was that you? Okay, yeah, one of his guns. So, yeah, we're not talking about much of a firearm. But again, these things were intended to make sure that we're not able to carry our firearm. Because again, if this was about public safety, that wouldn't be there, right?
You didn't even include ammo.
Oh, well then. Look, I didn't include ammo and I didn't include training. I was trying to be a little cheap on that, yeah.
Do you talk, like, this is a perfect example because this approach to policy, you see it in our state over in the nation with cigarettes. It's about cost reduction, right? Do you get into that because how that affects the community so differently? How we look at like how high it is to play with things that we look at as regressive taxation is really what it becomes, and it affects the communities that need it the most. So I love hearing this. Thank you for being here.
Oh yeah, thank you. This is definitely what it is because I ring this up. I charge all of this. I am the concealed carry vendor. I do issue the firearm safety certificate. I do instruct them on where to put the application fee. I do teach the 16-hour course. I sell the gun. I process the droves. I take to tax. I take to sin tax. I take to sales tax. So I see what this stuff is. And honestly, it is
administrative on you that wastes your time.
Oh, well, yeah, we're not even getting into the changes within my administration and what I'm supposed to do. I have an entire day on Monday that's dedicated to it. So just to try and keep my head above water before the ATF comes a knocking. So this is actually not the first 11% tax. There I go. Oh, you know what? I think some of my things got out of order. Oh, it did. Okay. Sorry. All right. So this is actually not the first 11% tax. The Pittman-Robertson Act tax is the actual first 11% tax. In 1937, there was a Pittman-Robertson Act tax that was written. It was Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act in 1937. It imposed an 11% tax. Revenue from this tax, wildlife agencies will go for wildlife agencies for efforts for hunter education and a shooting range, which is pretty interesting. And then we have our amazing sin tax, which is SB 228 by Gabby. Now, the bad thing, like I said, this stuff isn't even about public safety, because where does our 11% tax actually go? Oh, they getting checks?
Yeah, they get checks.
Okay, I'm about to enroll. Okay, but no, but on the real, where are these 11% tax going? Because when I tell you I'm setting it aside every single week, the amount that I'm setting aside every single week on top of my sales tax is nuts. Like my sales tax account since January 1st has went in overdrive. And it's just amazing that is, I'm considering the fact that they're collecting millions of dollars every single week because I am on such a small scale in comparison to Turner's and Ammo Brothers and the much larger companies that have brick and mortars in town. Yeah. However, the taxes are not going to the communities that need it the most. They're not going to the communities that are starving for it the most. They're not going to the communities that have high crime, okay? If you go into a community that has high crime and you show me one, I'm gonna show you a community that has a history of failed public policy, okay? Underfunded schools, no textbooks in the schools, no heating or air conditioning in the schools, potholes, no lack of infrastructure within the city, right? Predatory lending practices within the communities, no business loans. And when I say their lending practices is limited to check cashing places or payday advance loans that have high interest on it because that's all you see within the communities. So of course, I want to know where is the money going and how are we actually going to be working to fix the problem, because the larger issue is poverty. It's not the guns. People are out there with their guns and there's lawlessness because there is poverty and hopelessness. And a lot has been taken from these communities, but that's a whole nother story because I could do a whole nother 2-hour conversation on that. Oh, that's me. That's the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so this all got mixed up. Sorry. All right, so we're gonna hop over to our carry restrictions, and I'm back on track, hopefully. So the Watts riots was a Watts rebellion. It was a very significant history in Los Angeles. It was August 11th through August 16, 1965. It took place in predominantly African-American communities within Los Angeles. The Watts riot had kicked off because there was a young man named Marquette Fry. He was an African-American guy. He was driving home. He had got accused of driving under the influence A police officer pulled him over. His mom came, got involved. Obviously, things got a little bit rough. So him, his brother, and his mother ended up getting beat and thrown into jail. Obviously, this is not the first time that the Black community had seen something of a Rodney King beating, okay? Now, if we go back to thinking about what we seen on a Rodney King beating, how flagrant those police officers were we had choppers on them, we had cameras, we had news vans, and it did not stop them from beating the brakes off somebody in the street. And you got to think about what goes on behind closed doors, because we all know about the tip of the iceberg thing. We can't act like it doesn't apply to this as well. At the time, Chief William Parker, he managed the department from 1950 to 1966. If you guys ever seen any of the documentaries on him, you know he is probably the worst person to ever be in that position within that community. And thank God he is no longer there. There were 80 complaints of police brutality against that department just in 1958. And those are just the ones that were actually allowed and actually filed and actually not intimidated at the door or at the counter and told, don't do that, okay? The incident was a flashpoint for deeper issues within the community. It showed systemic racism. For one of the very first times within this time, it was now shown on TV. People got an opportunity to see it. Economic inequality, poor living conditions, police brutality that the African Americans in Watts and other parts of Los Angeles faced was now put on front display, and it couldn't be ignored. Approximately 34 people were killed. Over 1,000 people were injured and 4,000 people were arrested. Obviously, a lot of property was damaged too. I think it was guesstimated about 40 million. But the Watts riot was a turning point for a deep-seated racial tensions within the United States that served as a precursor for further civil rights struggles within the urban community and further unrest. So, the Black Panther Party, now follow me. So the Black Panther Party, after the Watts riot, that's where the Black Panther Party came in. The Black Panther Party was founded in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland. A lot of stuff, and even for me growing up, that I heard about the Black Panther Party was very negative. I was taught that they were not what they actually were. So the Black Panther Party actually had a lot of good programs within the Black community because the Black community did not have a lot of resources deliberately by the government. So they had free breakfast for children every morning before they went to school. They had free clinics that test for things like sickle cell and other ailments that did directly play within the Black community. They also had free clothing programs. They had free food programs. They had free busing to prison program. And the free busing to prison program, I thought was pretty interesting because when people are incarcerated, it's important that they maintain their strong family ties, because when they come home, they need to know that their family is with them, and that will stop them for further getting institutionalized. So in an effort to make sure that that wasn't happening, the Black Panther Party created a free busing program that took family members to and from prison to make sure that they maintain their connection with their incarcerated family members. They also had educational programs. They had back to school programs. They had educational programs that taught the Black community about Black history, things like that. How many of you guys knew that the Black Panther Party started the WIC program? So the Black Panther Party actually started the WIC program, the government WIC program, the woman, infant, and children that a lot of us have been on, getting a little cheese. You know what I mean? Getting a little cheese, go get your little milk. I mean, formula was expensive, so a lot of us were on the WIC program, but the WIC program was actually created by the Black Panther Party to help the Black women within the community. Oh, that's how I keep going forward, is when that goes. Okay, so the Women, Infant, Children program was actually started within the Black Panther Party to help the low-income women and children within the community stay on track. So all this stuff is good. All this stuff is created to help them stay on track. The only thing that was only thing that the government viewed as bad, and I'm not going to call it bad, the only thing the government viewed as bad about the Black Panther Party is that they had armed community patrols. They had armed community patrols where they patrolled the neighborhoods and they cop watched. They cop watched. They made sure that the police officers that were coming in there and that were ticketing people were only ticketing people, okay? They made sure that if there was an arrest to be made, and if it was a legitimate arrest, you made your arrest, and you took that person to jail because they followed up at the jail to make sure that the person got there. The Black Panther Party was there to protect the Black community, and they did it all armed. It was with firearms that they were able to protect the Black community. It was with their Second Amendment rights that they were able to protect the Black community and keep things from going on in there. So the policing of the community was intended to deter police brutality. It also empowered the Black community to allow them to take more control over their life and the direction in which things were going. They were no longer relying on 911 or calling the police or relying on the government to come in their community to try and solve some of these problems. Okay, so pretty much they created their own institution to self-govern their own little community and to try and keep theirs in check, but obviously that was broken down by our government. They legally carried firearms, and when they did encounter the police officers that harassed them about carrying their firearms, they cited their rights. I love it. So at the time, they were able to openly carry loaded firearms. The armed presence was obviously met with resistance by the police officer. They were viewed by the patrol officers as a threat to their authority. So just their presence, you know, just them standing on the sidewalk, watching them arrest somebody with a firearm was viewed as a threat to their authority. They never engaged with them. They didn't point their guns at them. They didn't come at them aggressive. All they wanted to do was make sure that the person that was getting arrested was allowed due process. Don't try them and execute them in the streets and not even take them into the department. All they wanted to do is make sure that that person got due process. So over time, they did make a plea to our government, okay? This guy. They did make a plea to our government. So at the time, they were making a plea to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the governor of our state. They were asking him to stop the systemic racism and the things that were going on within their community, for him to get involved and get with the chief of police over there and demand that this stuff stop taking place. Of course, all their requests were ignored. Since the Black Panther Party had continuously patrolled their communities with firearms, Ronald Reagan and Donald Mulford decided to come up with the Mulford Act. And the Mulford Act is what ultimately took our right to carry firearms within the state of California. So it prohibited, this is what they're proposing. It was going to prohibit public carry of loaded firearms without permit. It did receive bipartisan support, and surprise, surprise, the NRA 100% backed it. So it made sure, what it was going to do is make sure that the Black Panther Party was no longer able to have armed patrols within their communities. So as a response to them proposing this law, the Black Panther Party decided to take up arms, and they marched up to the Capitol.
Did everybody see that last slide, though? That last slide is funny.
Oh, that guy?
Just so you know.
Just so you know. Just so you know. That's the guy.
That's the guy, right?
Couldn't find a picture of Mulford.
Your hero stud, too.
What? All right. So on May 2nd, 1967, the Black Panther Party marched on the Capitol. The March on the Capitol was obviously a very significant event in American history. It highlighted the struggle for civil rights and racial justice, but what it also showed to the government is what the equal rights, what we are willing to do to fight for them. Okay, what we are willing to do to fight for them. So they marched to the Capitol. Bobby Sear read a statement out on the steps about the rights that he wants, the rights that are on the books that he does have that are not being acknowledged within the state and within the country. They didn't cause any type of damage to it. But the aftermath of that was shortly after that, Ronald Reagan did sign the Mulford Act. And after the Mulford Act, that was the end of California's open carrying. Okay. That's when California started having to go and get yourself a permit to carry a firearm. So all along, okay, we're talking about, and I'm not even going to go back that far, but we're going to say that the Second Amendment signed in 1791. Here we are in 1967. So between 1791 and 1967, free white men had always been able to carry a firearm. It wasn't until the African Americans said that they want their rights and their liberties and that they were willing to fight the government for them that we all lost them within the state of California. So I always find that pretty interesting. Firearms have always been a game changer in clashes. There was American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. 13 American colonies fought for independence from the British rule, and that resulted in the United States of America. Okay, firearms have always been a tool used to fight up against the tyranny of a government. Make sure I do this and not skip a slide again. Okay.
One with only 3 to 5% participation in the colonials.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be a message of encouragement.
Exactly. Exactly. There was also a whiskey rebellion. That was about a tax protest. That was in Pennsylvania. That also, it was suppressed by the government, but it was a pretty violent uprising. There was American Civil War between the North states or the Union and the Confederacy. That was over slavery. That was also, firearms were also an intricate part of winning that war, which also shaped what we are looking at today. There were also numerous labor strikes that ended in violent clashes with authorities over labor conditions and rights. And then, of course, the civil rights movement, the struggle for social injustice and equality for African American, marked by protests, civil disobedience, and clashes with authority. So we have, after the Mulford Act, we have the emergence in California of a lot of black militias. What do you think California did next? Yeah, my next slide is an anti-militia law. Yeah, it didn't take much to guess, right? So the anti-militias, 1980, several black militias had emerged as a response to racial discrimination, police brutality, economic disenfranchisement, and community needs for self-defense. At that time, the black community said that we had enough, we want to get together, police it, keep it safe, and do our own thing. So you have the new Black Panther Party. They stressed self-defense, economic empowerment, and black nationalism. They had community patrols, school programs, and political activism. You also have the MOVE organization. They advocated for environmental issues, animal rights, and anti-police brutality. Their compound in Philadelphia was also actually bombed, so a lot of their members had died. You got the Republic of the New Africa, the RNA. They sought to establish an independent black nation in the southeastern United States. They had community organizations, political advocacy, and armed self-defense. So they did self-defense training. The Fruit of Islam, the FOI, affiliated with the Nation of Islam, they actually provided security for a lot of our civil rights leaders. They also provided community security, training in self-defense, and leadership for the Nation of Islam. So some of the key characteristics that they all have in common is that they really emphasize the importance of self-defense. Okay, self-defense. They focused on community services like food distribution, education initiatives, healthcare clinics, and they advocated for equal rights for everybody. So, 1982, California passed Penal Code 11460. We have a anti-militia bill. And keep in mind, all this time, we've seen people have militias and train. So in California, any two persons who assemble as a paramilitary organization for the purpose of practicing with weapons shall be punished by imprisonment in a county jail for not more than 1 year. So what they mean is, if you don't have a badge and more than one person get together, go shooting,
You're in trouble.
you in trouble. Yeah, pretty much, you in trouble. That was actually signed into law in 1982. A couple other anti-Black militias were 1972 anti-Black militia, 1972 anti-Black militia law stated that militias were only limited to able-bodied white men between the age of 18 and 45. Clinton tried to write a 1994 law, HR 3838, that said that there were no firearms allowed in public housing, which is right, in public housing, where you would think that it would be the most and just need it the most. And looking at that reminds me of SB2, how they don't want you carrying firearms on public transportation. And in LA, that is their primary form of transportation. They get off that bus, they walk a couple blocks home, but they are not allowed to have protection for that 4 or 5 blocks, you know, which is when we see people's abuelitas getting robbed on their way home from work. So the second became law in 1791. Again, there has always been some sort of organization or paramilitary within the white community. So on top of the anti-militia law, come on, okay. On top of the anti-militia law, we still, even if we were able to get a firearm, we still needed an approval to carry our firearm, which was pretty interesting because MLK's home was firebombed, which is something that I just recently learned, that his home was firebombed. Well, not that, but after his home was firebombed, he went and applied for a concealed carry permit and he was denied. And I was just floored, like, right. Somebody who promoted peaceful discourse, peaceful protest, you know, conversations, love one another, was denied a concealed carry. I mean, if anybody was a poster child for Black firearm ownership and Black firearm ownership and concealed carry rights, that definitely would have been the guy that you should have given one to, so he could have paved the way for other people to have a better understanding of how this works and to be a leader, but they chose not to, and yeah, we know what happened to him now. All right, gun rosters. So gun rosters are nothing new. Gun rosters are intended to create a disparity in force, okay? They are created to create a disparity in force. The government wanted to make sure that they didn't have to worry about any type of insurrection coming from the community that they deliberately suppressed. So they made sure they didn't have any type of weapons. So there was constantly a disparity of force, okay? No different than what we're dealing with right now. Right now we have a gun roster that I hate, okay? But the thing about our gun roster is that our gun roster, again, creates a disparity of force. So the guy that's coming in our home, again, is not carrying 8 rounds in an M&P shield, right? Our gun roster prevents us from having the firearms at home that we will actually be encountering. The bad guy is carrying an AR-15 with probably 2 30-round magazines. He might even have on some armor. Who knows how far and how much he has planned, but the gun roster does create a disparity of force for us as well. A good example of the disparity of force was LAPD. You guys remember when LAPD had that shootout? Oh, yeah. 1997 Hollywood shootout. So one of the cops that was in that shootout is one of my customers. He went through my concealed carry class a few weeks ago. And we had all sorts of conversations. But one thing I thought was pretty interesting is that he said that when those guys started shooting, they had to run to local gun stores and get the gun stores to unlock their doors to get the rifles that they had, because there was such a disparity in force. They did not have these rifles within their possessions. They did not have them within the department. But yet here you got some civilians coming along. And if you guys seen the scene, I was looking at it this morning, I was like, wow, that's crazy. If you guys see the scene, I mean, they had lockdown blocks. These guys fired hundreds of rounds. I think that's when everybody kind of got introduced to the ARs. But these guys fired hundreds of rounds, and due to rosters, it created such a disparity of force within the police department, which is why they were allowed to stay active for so long. Everybody's wondering, why don't they get them? Why don't they get them? They couldn't. They couldn't. These guys had on body armor that could not be pierced. They had all their magazines. They were ready to go. Okay, but a couple of gun roster laws that we did have was, one was the Saturday night special. So that was a response to a spike in crime within urban communities. And the spike in crime was they attributed to the sale of cheaper handguns.
Do you think the gun roster law, not including, say, 10-round magazines and things like that, but don't you think the gun roster law is more of a money grab for the government? Because the reason why Glock does not put their Gen 4s and Gen 5s on the roster is because they're not paying those dollars to get those platforms approved by California. They said, California, go screw yourself. We know our platforms work. We're not changing our platform just because you want to charge us to change our platform. Because to change something on the roster, you could change a color, and now you have a different number.
Yeah, you
got to apply to a roster for a color change.
Yeah, I think it's a cash grab. It was initially intended to remove some of the cheaper firearms out of circulation. That was what initially intended for. California took it a step further. They're a little crafty, so they said, you know what, let's allow them, but we're gonna mark them up. And when they marked them up, that's when they started allowing additional features, wanting additional features to get them to come into the state. And then now that marks it up another, I mean, in Texas, I can get one gun for $350. In California, it comes to me for $440, $460, something like that. And then obviously it takes away from my profit margin. And then on top of that, I'm adding on almost a 20% tax on that firearm. So it all boils down to money with the state, well, with all the states, period. But yeah, California more so because they love it. But yeah, so the Saturday night specials were a direct response to an increase in violence within the urban community. They found that the majority of the firearms that they were using were smaller pistol handguns, 38 revolvers, the little 38 specials. So what they did was they put them on a roster and they excluded them from being sold. And that a roster expanded to not include a lot of the cheaper firearms that were more affordable to the low-income community, which is pretty much what we're seeing right now, right? Pretty much what we're seeing right now. When I log into my system, I see guns that I can be selling, decent guns I could be selling for $300 and $400. It's nothing that I would shoot, but it is self-defense for somebody who was on a budget. But all those guns, okay, a good example is we don't have any Taurus semi-automatics. That's how we are, okay? And Taurus is a cheaper firearm, but it's not the bottom of the line for quality. It's a decent quality. It's not a beautiful gun, but the gun will get the job done. And we don't have any semi-automatics in this state, because if we had those guns in the states, those will primarily go to the low-income communities because that will be what they are able to afford. And we don't have any of that on our roster. Also, our roster was being sued by can't remember who it was, but for an ADA violation because we only have three 380s on the market. Now for 380s for women, 380s are a huge deal because those slides move very easily on a 380 versus them having to shoot a 9mm. And if you're somebody like me that has weak and declining hands, I have a 380 just in case I have a bad hand day or my hands get worse. At least I have one right now. But the 380 also creates an ADA violation for anybody who has weaker hands, seniors, people who are disabled. You know, the only thing on the market for a senior to pull a slide that's somewhat easy is a Glock, but all our Glocks come in 9mm. So I can't even put them in a very easy 380 9mm. That's not going to create a lot of recoil. So since they can't operate the slide, the only other option ends up being a revolver. But all our revolvers are 38 specials and 357. So that's still, yeah, there's, okay, so there's no way around it. Okay, so.
And then our next speaker.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I went all on and on and on. So the whole point is to make sure that we protect ourselves from government tyranny. Let me move along. So moving forward, the new face of firearms, obviously, is a much younger version of what we've seen back then. Our industry is now getting more educated. We are younger, we are more innovative, and what we are looking to is to provide further education to the Black community to help them along. Our agenda is to create a better environment and to erase a lot of the narratives and the stigma that comes out of the community. For me, coming into firearm ownership, you know, when I was growing up, my mother was raised in Jim Crow South. So when I talked to her about firearms, what I was taught was that you don't touch them, and if I touch them, I get in trouble. Because her coming out of Jim Crow, that was her actuality. That was her reality. Okay, but for me, moving forward, I'm raising my kids to have a lot more hands-on. But again, that attitude right there is also what has shaped the the firearm ownership within the Black community, and why we don't have a lot of legal gun ownership, and why we don't have a lot of training and a lot of education and things like that, because the access to it has always been told that if we use it, we will be in trouble. So we've always avoided it. Good thing is that now we have 6,000 gun stores in the United States, and under 12 of them are Black owned. But we have under 12. So, so that's a start. Huh? We're on the board. Yeah, we're making some headway. Okay, well, I'm out of time. Yes, you got a question.
Your mission statement for Fortune Firearms, what would you say that is?
My mission statement.
Or for you as an individual?
My goal is,
Education's a part of it.
well, my primary goal is to bridge the gap, People getting more involved and enjoying their Second Amendment right automatically makes them more civically involved, and especially when it comes to the Black community, because what I'm seeing now is an uptick in us talking about laws. We are now talking about laws. We are now having the conversation about who's going in the office and what these things mean to us. And for me, my goal is to bridge the gap, not only between the Black community, but for women, and not only for women, but for liberals, and not only for liberals, but Democrats, not only for Democrats, but conservatives, because my place of business is a very welcoming area, and I get people in there that you would never believe would own firearms, but they come from far and wide. I mean, I had a woman that just came all the way from San Francisco to come train with me because representation matters, you know? And my goal is to continue to represent the firearm industry for everybody, you know, conservative, liberal, Black, white, female, for everybody, because it is for everybody.
Tell CNN when they came out?
What'd I tell them?
Said you're an American.
Oh yeah, I'm an American, yeah, as I told them. I'm an American, and my goal is to make sure that we all enjoy the equal rights, you know, the equal protections under the rights.
All right,
Thank you.
so much.